Just put up our little clickety-clack logo. Welcome to Evolution Hour. Every time I edit the show, I hear how my voice sounds, and I go, yipes. But what can I do? I was born this way. Remember the website, tortuganwordpress.com. There's all sorts of stuff. Okay. So, and let me also get our patrons dealt with here to thank you. It is important because it makes a, whoops, I'm going to get my little thing up to speed there. Okay, here we go. Running around in the little windows. I've seen Dan Stern Cardinale fumble around with units and that as well, and he's much younger than I am, so that makes me feel so much better. Okay. There we go. Thank you very much for all of the patrons who keep the project going every month through thick and thin, up and down, and in and out. I could not do this without all of your help. Thank you. And let everybody else, I would like the entire world to be patrons to the project. I'd love to get up to like Aaron Ra level or somebody like that. I see he was going off on a cruise and doing talks on evolution and creationism and all sorts of stuff. I'd like to do those sorts of things too. So if anybody out there knows people who know things to know things and connect them, I'm available in principle. What can I say? So, okie doke. As you know, I am doing a thing that I would recommend everybody do with something that is of their interest, which is doing a source analysis. In this case of Jonathan Sarfati and Tay's Titans, which is a creationist book purporting to make sense of the dinosaurs. And what I'm talking about in terms of doing source analysis, if it lacks an index or if it lacks a clear sense about what references are being used for it, for example, has no bibliography, then any work like that that's in your area of expertise seems a logical thing to dive into, because it now permits you to see what exactly is being cited and what isn't being cited, and how what is being cited is used, and is it reasonable or unreasonable or not. And as we've shown in previous analyses of various books, creationists don't do very well at this game. It's a game they cannot play at all. And this one is kind of interesting in the structure of it. The average creationist work, Rupin Sanford and the Jensen works, has a high proportion of technical literature. They tend to allude to the creationist stuff kind of around the periphery. Not so this book. We're running way over half so far of the sources that they've cited are just other creationist works. And that can lead them into a little bit of trouble. Of the technical citations, as we just dealt with last week, of the technical citations that they brought up, it's running nearly 50% misrepresentation, which is par for the course for the average creationist. Some of the stuff isn't misrepresented simply because it's non-controversial. They're making a statement that no one is disputing. It doesn't really bear upon the point at issue. They're technically correct, that kind of stuff. No, what I refer to for misrepresentations are if they're making a claim about a source that it directly does not claim, or if they're cherry picking a little teeny snippet out of it, which is much more common, but the full tenor of the work is not actually helping their case any if you started to look closely. And that would be the example of the things we're going to be getting into today. They cite a 2016 paper by Sakamoto, which I will be putting the full link up because it's in PNAS, so that's easy peasy. And they're citing it only for the notion that the dinosaurs needed to be divided into subclasses as theropods, ornithischians, and so forth. Nothing whatsoever about the actual topic of the paper, which is about whether dinosaurs were in decline over the millions of years prior to the mass extinction. Well, you can see the obvious problem. There's a problem with the chronology, which theoretically there can be no millions of years involved. What you're seeing is a pileup of dinosaurs landed in the flood. But why then would they sort out in ways that would imply logical contexts in which things are having their ups and downs. Hi, Lisa. Needless to say, Sarfati and Tate don't address that issue because they don't deal with the actual content of the work. In terms of my analysis, I'm regarding that as a misrepresented source because holy smokes, there's an awful lot of technical material in there. They go into great detail about the various faunas and groupings and speciation rates and all this kind of stuff. How could you even do that in the big slosh scenario where all of this supposedly is a scrunched up mass of all organisms living safely that are trapped in the slosh over the course of a year? I'd love to see them try to handle that material, but not likely to see so. Oh, but it gets worse. So they decide to cite somebody for some authority quoting, commenting on these issues of systematics. And it's from a 2018 piece by our dear old friend Ord, who I have dealt with a lot in the various works. He's grumping about that issue about how the Herrerasaurs fit in, which was a topic of last week. And you'll notice what's missing from this, because I don't have the Sarfati and Tate text that I could link to directly, but fortunately, they've gone to Ord. Ord sums it up beautifully. Where's their model? Where's the creationist model? Sarfati and Tate don't have a creationist model for what exists when, under what circumstances, what the paleo environment is, or all that. Neither does Ord. Ord doesn't even, well, it's understandable that he doesn't cite technical material from their end on the systematics within baraminology of dinosaurs because they haven't worked out very well. How do they get around to not having many, many more fossils? Yeah, that's the whole bit is, remember, in principle, all of the things that are in the fossil record are stuff that was from the initial creation week that has proliferated in ways they do not go into to the forms that are alive when the flood happens, samples of which are taken aboard the ark as the representatives of the created kind. Don't worry about too much details. And those that eventually proliferate into the species we know after they come off the ark, even though by the Ark Encounters perspective, over half of them go extinct, 54%. So the ark wasn't doing a very good job of preservation. Creationists don't really like to get around too much as to why that was the case. What was the whole, why bring the dinosaurs on the ark when they're all going to go extinct? Was the omnipotent God not aware of what was going to happen? Omniscient? They don't clear that up. And Ord certainly doesn't clear it up. But what we've got is that flood environment where you've got organisms that all of which must functionally be contemporary. Sometimes they'll weed it down. Various creationists will go into the most hilarious misplaced concreteness of arguing that certain segments are in the early stages of the flood, and then here's the mid-range, and here's the waters receding, and blah, blah, blah. But it still is a thing that's compressed over a year or so. So all of these organisms are functionally contemporary. And that means that the dinosaurs and elephants and trilobites and all of the various organisms that we find in the fossil record are functional contemporaries. How the hell did they get distributed the way they do? And the fact this is on the specific issue of the systematics, because within a systematic kind, there would be a limited number of kinds. The whole point of the Ark Encounter was to whittle down the number of kinds to a manageable level, basically the family level, to allow them to fill up the ark without overflowing it. And creationists will go out of their way foot stamping about how, we know about speciation, and we aren't claiming that species went on the arks, it was the kinds, which then begs the question of how many kinds there are, and how do you get the diversity that we see during the flood snapshot versus the diversity we see afterwards. Why such a strangely diverse group of things? The Earth wouldn't be able to handle it all. Yeah. In fact, there's various modes. You might get away, because we have to remember how relatively few organisms are involved with vertebrates. it may seem like there's an awful lot going on, but you can maybe work your way around it a bit, although you start getting into trouble when you're looking at fish and marine life, which is one of the reasons why creationists don't really like to think about that too much, is how many organisms would be involved to create stuff. And Erica Gutsip-Gibbon has done some summary work on this as well, thinking about all the organisms that are involved in making diatoms and foraminifera. It's fine and dandy imagining them living over millions and millions and millions and millions of years, but if you try to figure out what kind of ecosphere is involved, if all of them are at once, you start getting into a mess. And bacterial life the same way. And then again, all of the problems with heat and all the other factors in there. It's a hilarious mess. So what the matter of is you're looking at how the creationist is tiptoeing around the mental Grand Canyon of the problems entailed in working out the flood. And in the case of this matter about the dinosaurs, we get to see Ord walking straight towards the rim and then stopping at the rim and turning around and going, oh, those evolutionists can't explain this. Like the creationist has a model, other than him just simply blurbing out at one point, it's still safe to conclude that dinosaurs were specially created and that they defy an evolutionary sequence or classification. Okay, where is the creationist classification? Footnote needed. That was in 2018. Sarfati and Tay are writing in 2022, and we are now in 2024, and we're still waiting for the show to see how they're going to be coming up on this. Spoiler alert, if your model is wrong, if your assumptions are impossible, they're never going to make this work. And so, yes, but mug book. And so we want to make sure, you see, we want to play uber fair with the creationists, because they aren't claiming that there should be any insects on board, although in some quibbly senses, they may have to tweak that for ones that can't possibly survive in an aquatic environment. They don't really think very clearly on that. But of course, we all know there's an enormous number of insects. So that's a horrifying field for them to dive into. And I think we could all sit back with our little popcorn or beer handy to just while away the time watching them not work this out. And then you've got that even bigger mess going on with the systematics of marine organisms and marine invertebrates, and invertebrates that exist in the terrestrial environment. Take a whack at nematode worms there, give that all a whack. So what we've got is an ongoing, they can only go so far, but they're never going to really be able to get all of the way. Which brings us to a little bit about the part two. A new character popped up on the scheme, Bruce Lawrence, who hadn't really written much before, and he's starting to pop up at CMI. And he did a piece in 2022 on the marvelous molecule. Ooh, and again, I'll be putting a little link in on that. What's going to be funky, I put a little box in my own notes around a particular paragraph, and then a little notations about the various references. When I do these things up, I print them into a document file and color code them as to like how much of the stuff is from the creationist. So I'll put that in red and all that to make a visual cue. Anyway, the little bit on this is it's largely Origins or Bust, a rhapsody on the marvelous design DNA. And along the way, in the paragraph that I put the box around, he opined how there were massive differences between us and chimpanzees, specifically with, quote, humans possessing entire gene families that are not found in chimps and vice versa, unquote. For which he cited one source, Don Batten from 2014, another CMI post, which I'll be putting up for you to look at. And by the way, which Lawrence's notes and the CMI insist on listing as 2013 in their secondary references. So they get the date actually wrong, but it's a 2014 posting. Problem is, at no point does Batten make any point claiming that bit about the genes in humans versus chimpanzees. He's going on about the 99% sharing bit, but he does not explicitly mention, as far as I can see, if I missed it somehow, let me know. But I don't see any spot where he makes a claim that there are any genes, not genetic information, but genes that are in one but not the other. So why did Bruce Lawrence think that he had done that? Is he not understanding the difference between genetic and genes as a very specific thing? Entirely possible. We can see. So that is going to be kind of fun to look into that daisy chain process that goes on. This then will end up getting referenced in the new book because it's all part of that discussion of human evolution and primate origins and the genetic differences between pongids and human beings and all of that. Erica and Dan Stern Cardinale and others have been doing some delicious new posts because Robert Carter just keeps beating the dead horse, trying to defend Nathaniel Jensen's arguments about the genetics of these things, where he's scrunching everything down into that flood context. And it's just hilarious to see how much difficulty. So I've been adding new material all the time. I've got segments on the genetic information that gets alluded to in relation to this ping pong match going on between the creationists and their various critics. And so since we have a section on that in the upcoming book, I have to keep adding all these new bits that come along as the additional shoes keep dropping and the new technical papers come up. Fortunately, our little group that we have, the Science Friends, in our little Twitter Bex story, Dan Cardinale is in that, and Zach Hancock, and Friend Colton from the channel on the geology front, and Erica, and a whole slew of people. And between them, it's often very deliciously technical, and tons of science information gets brought up on that. And so I get queued up on this material so that I can make a point of bringing it all in, so that our volume 2 will be as spectacular a compendium of stuff up to the publication date of the book as volume 1 was. Oh, it's delightful. So the human evolution section, my brain is boggling to figure out how we'll be able to get all of the stuff edited and structured and make it, because there's just so much delicious information. The amount of paleontology that's available today is just mammoth. And I'll be letting Jackson do the overview to get the big picture structure of things going, and then I'll figure out how I'm sorting all my material in and putting in little sidebars and all that kind of stuff as we go. I have warned him, however, there is the possibility that when we get all pushed to shove and get all of our stuff in place, that we might need to bump it over to a volume 3 for some of the stuff, because it may or may not exceed the limit, because the first volume was literally at the upper boundary layer of what you can print up at Amazon's CreateSpace. And so I had to even shrink if you wonder why the font size is so incredibly tiny on the bibliography, it's because that was to get the length of the thing down for page numbers down below their maximum limit. So I'm crossing fingers that we'll be able to get the volume 2 in, all of those full chapters involved, but we'll see. In working on the stuff that I've been doing on the flood legends and the creationists' view of animal dispersions and carnivory, and hunting around for living dinosaurs and looking for pictures of dinosaurs in medieval tapestries that prove they were alive in the Middle Ages, and blah, 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 all of this stuff. Soft tissue in the dinosaurs, all of that stuff has built up quite a massive section, to where I've had to split the chapter that I had been assigned there into 2. So the reference bibliography on that is over 150 pages. So it's a lot of stuff that goes on. But I don't think anyone has dove into all of these topics in quite as much depth as we're going to be pulling off on this section. Plus, some of it's just gobsmackingly hilarious. Creationist novelists who try to figure out what the pre-flood world was like, and stuff on the just obsession with ancient technology, trying to drag that into the biblical culture framework. And so that slides into not only cryptozoology, but also into ancient astronauts, Graham Hancock sort of stuff. There's a lot of just wacky crossover material. that goes on in this area. I mean, UFOs even. Holy moly, there's an awful lot of stuff going on. So all of that, to get all that material in play so that it's as vivid and smooth as possible. And then I still have the cosmology chapter to do, and then the big appendix that will be relating to Answers in Genesis's Ark Encounter kind list, which will be the first place that pulls together all of the issues about why they list the things they do and why are they listing them in the order that they are, as well as are some of them problematic even from within their own frame as to why they're assigning them kinds or not. And the major bit is that they're basically riffing off of conventional systematics. So as evolutionary systematics changes, oh, I thought ancient astronauts was only an alien thing. Oh, we would love that to be. Well, maybe we wouldn't love that to be the case. But remember, you've got, David Childress is particularly somebody that kind of falls into this boundary layer because he's kind of a creationist flood groupie that links up with the Noah's Ark bunch, and he links up with the ancient astronauts, super civilizations of the past crowd. So there's a whole churning mess of that woo and pseudoscience stuff that operates at the level below AIG, ICR, CMI, the nice official PhD creationists that have their cute little conferences. They're as removed as the Discovery Institute is. But dive down below, really at the Kent Hovind level and below level, down to Nephilim Free and that crowd. Nephilim Free was he may still be a flat earther. I don't know. He was very vague about some of these things. And that's where you're bumping into a whole bunch of stuff. So there is a desire to have the period to be an example of super duper fantastic, incredible science. And in that respect, then they look around and they drag in the Antikythera mechanism and the pyramids and a whole bunch of other stuff. The pyramids get a little sidebar in the new book in that as well, because that, of course, is a big chronological problem for them. The Egyptian culture seems to be going through the flood period without noticing it, which is a trick to do. So I have been waiting literally for decades. Again, just sitting here going, tick, 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 tick. I wonder how long before they notice that they need to move Egypt down past flood. This was not a thing that was being thought about in the Duane Gish, Henry Morris era in the 70s and 80s. But because of the chronological structure of the Egyptian culture, and my familiarity, ironically enough, with all the little pseudoscience of Immanuel Velikovsky, who also was tinkering around with Egyptian chronology, you've got a hell of a lot of stuff they need to move. The Chinese as well. Yes, the Chinese are also, we're getting some stuff in there as well, because one of the little sidebars that's just hilarious in the Flood Legends appendix, which it got to the point where I needed, just move it over to a new appendix for the book, has to do with the various legends that the Chinese have about the flood and how closely they do or do not reflect Noah. And there's a little teeny subculture in the creationist movement that insists that the Chinese language is derived directly from Genesis, that the Genesis story, Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden and all this stuff are buried as like little linguistic fossils in the character structure of the Chinese language. And it's a very tiny group of cranky creationists who push this, and you probably don't hear about it much. It gets alluded to just peripherally at the AIG ICR level, but not very often. But it's there. There's postings up, and we'll again have all the information and links on that. As you move farther down into the Noah's Ark has been found crowd, and that crowd, they start noticing and believing this stuff more. And one of them involves the character for flood, another one for boats, and the like, that they think directly connects up to Noah, and the number 8. And the section we call Crazy Eights. That's just fascinating to see that they're operating mentally just like occultists, hunting around to try to connect the tarot cards up to the Kabbalah and astrology and all that stuff. Methodologically, it's no different. And it's intriguing to see who gets sucked into this thing and how much happens with it, and dealing with a lot of these little daisy chains that occur as people come up with one idea and a small network will copy those, and you may not realize how it's just chasing back just like the one or two people. So it's a funky little bit. Yeah, it's an amazing amount of cross currents that are going on at the level below the surface apologetics. See, when you're looking at somebody like AIG and ICR and CMI, they have a doctrinal position that is relatively tidy and it is petrified. So they have a model that everything has to match up with doctrinally. Now, as you start moving to compare the groups, you may bump into things, and we're alluding to them, where the doctrines aren't matching up because they've got their own little niche. So we've got Randy Guglielmo, who's now the head of ICR. He's obsessed with getting rid of natural selection. He doesn't want it to be a thing. He's come up with this CET model. We're going to have a little segment in one of the appendices that'll go into the little back and forth on all of this. It's untenable. And for all practical purposes, nobody outside of ICR is paying any attention to it whatsoever. But Guglielmo and a small network of aficionados play around with this. Similarly, at ICR, we've got the Tim Clary orbit and his bunch that's half a dozen people who want to pull the flood boundary down past the Cretaceous into the Cenozoic, because they really want to pull in things like the Green River and all of that stuff into the framework. But then that entails a bunch of mess, and most young Earth creationists aren't willing to do that. They want to keep it at the dinosaur extinction level and not go any farther. So you've got these little sub niches that are going on. And then, of course, there's the systematic problem that new breed of creationists. Old Duff has alluded to this stuff. You got your Todd Woods and Kavanaugh and others who are genuinely trying to create a new form of rigorous creationism, although it's inevitably slamming into the doctrines, which involves how much speciation is allowed, what's the origin of human beings, how many of the fossil hominids are us, just weirdly mutant human beings, what are the boundary layers on things, whether or not some creationist down the road is going to decide that Adam and Eve were Australopithecines and just bite the bullet, on this. I don't know. Given the weirdness of what we see happening in creationism, it wouldn't surprise me if some little groups come up with that kind of stuff, because creationism has undergone evolutionary processes. They've altered their doctrine over time. And if you're an old fart like me and are familiar with the stuff, that's one of the advantages of being an old fart who has read the old creationism of the 70s and 80s and 90s that is, for all practical purposes, not online, as opposed to the newer creationism of the stuff that is almost exclusively online. And it's not, it intersects with the old doctrines, but it has a bunch of new players that are the main names that you're seeing at ICR and AIG and CMI. And then you've got this new generation, because we're now decades into the 21st century, that you're going to see the newer ones. They're not a hell of a lot of newer ones, but, people that are not old farts, at least, who inevitably are going to try to put their new spin and structure on stuff. So I've mentioned before about how plate tectonics was a thing that was absolutely denied back in the Duane Gish era of the 20th century, and now is just accepted. Carnivory, animal carnivory, the doctrine that was the case in that 20th century model was not just that carnivory came in after Adam's sinning, but that carnivory really only kicks in after the flood. And that was the party line for quite a long time. But now that's becoming untenable. And you're finding that the creationist literature has mutated and evolved to where increasingly AIG, ICR, and CIMI are accepting that fossil animals that lived before the flood were carnivores, that there were carnivores during that period. They don't stop and call attention to it much, but it's there. Well, that I will say that that is an extremely niche position about dinosaurs planted by Satan. Um, we still have, and there's going to be a little section in the new book on it, on the dino deniers. They're really a small group of people, and to some extent, they come from the Seventh-day Adventist framework, not the official level of, Loma Linda University level, the PhD types, but just the subculture. That notion has been percolating around in that frame, and there would have been people going much, much farther back who had that exact same attitude, that he didn't really like fossils at all, and they don't think they're really real. But it's never been a major feature of the major players in the anti-evolution movement that I know of. If anybody's got an example of a major player who was arguing that fossils are faked at the level of a Dwayne Gish, I'd love to know about it, because we'd want to allude to it. But I don't know of any. So if you look at the new generation of dino deniers that think that the dinosaurs never existed at all, they're just made up, fake news. These people tend to be way below the Kent Hovind level. Yeah, greetings, sentient beings. They're way below the Kent Hovind level. And I know that may be a shock to think that there is something below the Kent Hovind level. But when you start really diving around in the weird Looney Tunes corners of things, I debated a dinosaur denier, not on the dinosaurs, but on the Titanic. He's just almost like an outlet mall, one-stop shopping for loony conspiracy thinking. I forgot the fellow's name right off the bat. I'm blessed by not being able to remember his name at the thing, but he's in the notes. And he and another, this sweet little lady, but just screwball, kind of a new wave occultic flower power child drug addly creationist. It's an odd mix of people, but you get an awful lot of odd mixes of things knocking around the periphery. And that's where you tend to get unusual mixtures of people who come from unusual backgrounds, and they connect up in unusual ways. It's looking like James Tour might be falling into some of these little rabbit holes. For those of you familiar with James Tour, he's a chemist who normally would be associated with the intelligent design movement, and he is really adamant about there being no origin of life, that it's just technically impossible. And he's had various people debate with him. I still got to see the debate that he had with Cronin a little ways back, and then that absolute fireball of a debate that he had with Professor Dave. Holy smokes. But anyway, what caught Joel Duff's attention, and we're alluding to it in the book, is that out of the blue, a tour appears on a young Earth creationist friendly religious broadcast, where he is talking about soft tissue as suggesting that dinosaurs aren't really very old. And I'm going, what? The only place he could be getting that apologetics is young Earth creationist apologetics. It's not a thing that is made out at old Earth creationist reasons to believe or anything in the intelligent design movement. So he is dibble-dabbling in a framework that is implied by the content of what he said, because that's so distinctively young Earth creationist. And yet he's not come clean about any of this kind of stuff. So it's very much the case that there are a lot of little nooks and crannies that go on with people when they're looking online, and they have a little worldview that they're defending, but they don't necessarily blabbermouth that, except in little sidebar content with people that they find appropriate. Yes, they researched that. Shot them during the Civil War around. So yeah. Oh yeah, we're going to be alluding to the pterosaurs from the Civil War. We're trying to catalog everything on the cryptozoology front, and the various coverage, because a lot of this stuff is material that is out there and yet isn't really known. You've got the Carl Fegans types who love looking into cryptozoology and pseudo-archaeology stuff and all of that, but it's a niche environment that only occasionally bumps into full-out creationism. And some paleontologists deal with some of the stuff. So there's a bunch of little niche discussions of it. If it's in the same level of what you get when you have people who are going on and on about the Shroud of Turin, and so you have ones that are kind of focused on that little side issue, but it doesn't always get alluded to in other contexts. Yes, Mokele Mapembe. Oh yeah, yeah. There's our little African dinosaur thing, which it's looking like mainly it's reached the level of tourist trap thing that they know it's a revenue generator. And so investigators, air quotes, investigators will come in looking for Mokele Mabembe, and the locals will talk about all sorts of stories that they heard about their cousin so-and-so who supposedly saw such and such, but not be too detailed on blah, blah, blah. And it's a way of keeping them staying over, and they're at the hotel and they're doing all the stuff in the same way that Ness has made a big deal about the Loch Ness Monster, and you've got the Ogopogo bunch in Lake Champlain. It becomes a tourist thing. You've got there are little towns that are acting as a tourist draw for people looking for Sasquatch. You know, it goes all over the place. Oh, and the hunt for Noah's Ark. That there's an act by 2019. The group that's sort of coddling the NAMI bunch that are probably fraudulent, we're going to go into all of that stuff. It's a bunch of Korean creationists who've been hunting around and may have concocted a faked up Noah's Ark ruin that they've done filming in. It's fascinating stuff. And there's a niche group of creationists that accept that as, you know, Angelo is somebody that's bought into that beautifully. Anyhow, that there was a report they did in the Turkish government that explicitly is thinking about the revenue stream of tourism and bringing people in to be able to hunt for these things and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, you can't blame them. It's a, you know, out of the way, middle of nowhere, no industry or whatever, you know, but if you got a bunch of idiots with a little more money on their hands that can come in and hunt around looking for Noah's Ark, when you know they're never going to be able to find it, which means you're never going to have to worry about them ever encountering it and then stopping coming. You know, they're always going to be coming, always going to be coming. Occupants living in freshwater lakes in Oklahoma. No, I haven't heard about that one. That's it wouldn't necessarily, in Oklahoma is kind of an interesting thing. There is always the possibility that you have introduced non-native species. All, you know, it'd be fascinating to see all the little background details on this kind of stuff that pops up, because we've got so many issues of organisms that people might keep as a pet, or that could be invasive species or somewhere. Now, if it's a form that is a genuinely old thing that lives in a little niche or something like that, it'd be rather fascinating. But searching lake monsters prime me to deconvert from religion. That will be part of it. We allude to big chunks of stuff because the lake monster material not only fits in with the cryptozoology claims about living dinosaurs and marine creatures, you know, Leviathan surviving and seen by a Ohio tribe and put down in their lore. But it also connects up with flood lore and all of that stuff, with the various flood legends and tales and how those things get metastasized and misrepresented. What we'll be making clear is just how much of their analyses are based on really unreliable secondary sources or older secondary sources as opposed to newer material. And there's actually quite a lot of perfectly fine lore about collecting the various mythologies in the Pacific Northwest and the Plains Indians, and we'll be citing a lot of that stuff in the new book. That doesn't match up with the versions that are being presented in the creationist literature. And when you try to find out what sources they're drawing on, it's typically very specialized, limited secondary material that isn't qualifying much. Some of the stuff is very mythic in nature, and some of it involves even something as strange as connecting up with the copper mining subculture in the area up around the Great Lakes. There's a lot of unusual interactions that are going on. In the same way of the role that salamanders play mythologically in European culture, and how some creationists have tried to claim that images of salamanders in a Renaissance prince's mansion are actually supposedly dinosaurs, when no, they're salamanders. And salamanders have a whole bunch of little mythic connections that have nothing to do with their supposedly being dinosaurs. Yeah, well, that would be, and that actually is of relevance to the whole flood idea about ancient creatures existing. Is that why have whales survived, but plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs and pliosaurs and mosasaurs haven't? And why don't we ever find their bones mushed together? The same thing with avian creatures. Why don't we find an eagle and a pterosaur perched on the same tree, destroyed during the flood? Um, why not? So the notion that, well, kind of maybe we should, is what leads people down this little cryptozoology bit of where they want to get the incredible thing put together. Bring back the 7-foot penguins. Yes. Yeah, a lot of range of stuff. Yeah. And some of the stuff gets into paleontology. One of the little niche areas of modern creationism is dealing with unicorns as an extinct species of giant ox that's got a single horn, which was totally unknown to biblical people, but, grasping at straws. What do? Dragonflies the size of eagles. Yes, indeed. All that high oxygen level, which again is yet another difficulty of oxygen levels and ocean levels and all that. The creationists, Tim Clary in particular, has had to come up with a completely imaginary ocean level chart, which he has done simply by analoging sedimentary rock on the land as somehow a proxy for sea level, and it's just screwball. He's also come up with just a hilarious landmass as a dinosaur refuge that is actually exactly the opposite of the facts, because the middle of the North American continent was a sea, not land. And so he's just conjuring this stuff out of thin air. Needless to say, he doesn't get too close to the little forensic details on that stuff. And you could future critics of creationism could go berserk, tracking down all the little sidebar issues of how a lot of these things going on. And hopefully our work will be a springboard for people doing all of that to keep track of all this stuff, because creationists aren't going to go away. They managed to muddle along fine and dandy, although they are facing a kind of geriatric problem. ICR and others, they're often very older people, my age and that often. You do have a trickle of younger people coming in, but as Duff has noticed, that runs the risk of them bringing in fresh woo to connect up and metastasize and modulate the system. So one of the things that we try to do a bit, legends in Sweden, sea monsters living off the coast. One story even claims World War I sunk a German patrol. Yeah, there's a whole slew of stuff. I think Dwayne Gish alluded to a submarine crew that supposedly saw sea monsters back in World War I. And so there's a bunch of things. But then again, Gish's credulity is just off the mark. We pulled together, for example, all of the material that's finally come out regarding the supposed crashed pterosaur in the Tombstone Epitaph, which is one of the most hilarious apocryphal tales, and how it got swept up and still gets alluded to in the creationist literature peripherally to this day, but it's just got nothing to it. And therefore it shows the credulity of anybody that thinks there was something to it. The description of the animal that supposedly crashed in like 1890 something is biologically impossible. Giant squid, maybe. Yeah. Well, now on the real sidebar front, I don't think we've had any reason to directly allude to it yet, but we're gonna we'll see if we can't slip it in at some point in the new book. Is that weird little paper that came out a few years back? Wick Ramasinghe and his colleagues were trying to argue that cephalopods came from outer space, and it was a weird genetic argument that it immediately got notorious, and I think it was finally retracted. Is in one of these little pay-for-play kind of journals, but it got some really big pushback from people who were going, "What?" You get that every once in a while, and of course we've got a circumstance of where there are an awful lot of retracted papers. And a review study in Science just a month or so ago did some surveying on it, and there are some patterns that show up. I was already aware of the fact that an awful lot of these things related to medical things where people got a lot of big money stakes in coming up with fake stuff. But what was intriguing was the number of nations that were the top offenders. None of them were the United States. Saudi Arabia and Iran and Chinese in some respects. And so if you rank them by the number of papers retracted by culture, you've got a bunch of ones that have a reputation that they want to make, and some journals that they can publish in or create from their own, and that have squishy standards. Adopted another kitty. Yes, needed a friend to play with. That's always good. Yeah, we had a cat in the house many, many moons ago, and never had her declawed, and so she was always a terror on the furniture. But after little Dusty died, I've had no desire to replace the little creature. At any rate, so there's an awful lot of stuff that will be hopefully some things that you go, what? In the creationist movement that you didn't really realize because they're operating at this little niche level. And there'll be an awful lot of the players, some of the stuff that are operating at the peripherally, you're Standing for Truth and Nephilim Free and that crowd that you can find on the internet. They're operating often 800 miles away from anything even remotely connected, even to traditional creationism. And since so few of them ever bother about source material, trying to track down the weird lines of reasoning that have led to where they are today is sometimes that you can't figure out where they were getting some of their stuff. Oh, yeah. Well, we had to put Dusty down as well. She had a little aneurysm in her leg and that. But she lived a very, very long life. She was absolutely delicious little cat. I think she would have found living into the 21st century frustrating because she liked to sleep on top of the television set. The heat of the old TVs was just wonderful. And so that was a great little spot. But, flat screen TVs aren't going to work for her. It would be very, very frustrating. She would be probably leaping up, trying to get on top of the bloody thing and wondering why it wasn't doing what she wanted it to. At any rate, so that brings everybody up to speed. Needless to say, anybody that hasn't got either one of the books, I put the links in that all the time. I put link up to the Patreon account in every video, and links to the Paralogs Fog. So we're working on Rocks Volume 2 and the third Paralogs novel at the same time. And that keeps my brain busy, as well as swabbing out the basement from the leak that I can't afford to get repaired. And that makes fun. But fortunately, my sister had left a wet vac thing here that I can go and swab up the stuff after the dryer and stuff goes. There was a big malfunction in the bathroom, the basement bathroom years ago. So it's been now blubbing up stuff and I can't do any bloody thing about it because I know it would shoot up into $10,000-$20,000 range if we ever tried to revise it. So I'm going to have to become much more successful than I am now to be able to pull off that little thing. Anyway, I got the first book, but haven't been able to make time to read it. Well, it's a thing. Proceed as you go. And the novels are all in very, very tight, short chapters, typically. Then they get a little bit more involved as you move to the climax sections of the story, where things are often taking place over a very tight time frame. So where you've got lots of things going on in the course of a few hours and that. And so those are the largest chapters, typically structured. And then the material on the science books front, we try to get that structured and organized. I think we've worked out a nice format with the chapter heading structures. And then, of course, I'm the ones responsible for constructing really tightly organized indexing and the reference bibliography. So Jackson doesn't have to bother about that angle of it. And once in a while, little miscellaneous glitches come in. There was one little, Snelling source that got accidentally in the first book that was part of the plan when we were going to do it all as a single book. And I forgot to delete it. So somebody called that to my attention. But, to err is human. And but to correct requires sound method. So let me put up our little advert for what do we got going here? For our little Rocks Were There book, which, as I know, Somewhere there may be a way to adjust the volume on it, but it's very noisy. I'm well aware of that. So whenever it starts running, you turn your volume down and just look at the wonderful pictures, etc., etc. Let me get that organized here. There we go. And then we do our screen share. Clickety click. Yeah, Jackson and I are extremely proud of the book, and we intend to be just as proud of Volume 2 and the other books that we will be doing in years to come on various subjects that we have planned out. So there's no shortage of stuff to do. There's no shortage of woo to deal with. It keeps percolating up because human beings are prone to that sort of thing. So anyway, keep on guard and be safe where you are. If there are rampaging wooden penguins, act accordingly. You know, what can you do? And stay safe, everybody. And we will see you all next week. So we're talking about rocks. That is high praise from Steve Bauman. Yeah, he read through the geology section to cross-reference and make sure that we had everything right. And neither one of us are geologists, but we're careful. And so basically there were just a few little topics and little sidebar material that we incorporated into the stuff that was little minutia that we didn't know on the other thing. But our major point, we were making no boners at the primary front, and that's always reassuring. We're annoying but thorough. So anyway, see you all next week. Stay safe, and we